Andy, you've just heard Dr. Hassett has a somewhat different view. You know, it's interesting. There's a commonality here. I think everybody agrees we got to have deficit and debt reduction over a 10-year period, that we can't allow the debt to continue to grow. I think we've got commonality of view on that. The difference that I hear is a question of timing. When do you start to impose the fiscal discipline? I hear Dr. Zandi, Dr. Stone, you would put it off because of the weakness of the economy now. Dr. Hassett has a different view, that we should start right now. I don't want to misstate your view, Dr. Hassett, so speak up if I'm misstating it, but that's what I've heard here. On the other hand, everybody is saying there are things that you can do that would be effective right now. Dr. Zandi, you've said payroll tax relief ought to be high up on that agenda. Dr. Hassett has talked about tax reform. A tax reform agenda could provide an immediate boost. So, Dr. Zandi, what of what Dr. Hassett has recommended would you most strongly agree with, and what would you most strongly disagree with?
And we are good friends. I would let me say a couple of things. First, I'm not arguing that we shouldn't have fiscal restraint now. I'm just arguing it shouldn't be as large as we have in current policy. I mentioned 1.7 percentage points in 2012. I'm not arguing turn that all the way around and say add to growth. I'm just saying scale that back a bit given the current state of the economy. That's all I'm saying. I think we should start now, just not to the degree that we're anticipating. And I agree almost entirely with what Kevin said in terms of corporate tax reform. I know he's a large proponent of work share for unemployment insurance. His focus on long-term fiscal issues, I think I agree totally. The one place I don't agree is that I do think providing some additional relief in the near term, like extending the payroll tax holiday for another year, would be very beneficial. He's absolutely right that when you get into 2013 and 14, there's a payback. There is no free lunch. I'm not arguing that. But I do think I'm much more optimistic about our economy's fundamentals. I don't buy in to the Rogoff-Reinhart view that we're going to be stuck in a malaise for 10 years. That is a study based on experiences overseas in many periods of time, not our experience today. And the United States economy is a very flexible one, and we've righted a lot of the wrongs that got us into this mess. Corporate balance sheets, non-financial U.S. businesses, have never, ever had as good a balance sheet as they have today. Their debt service burden is as low as it's ever been. The amount of cash they have on their balance sheet is as high as it's ever been. By any metric, businesses are in great shape. The banking system has made significant progress, largely because of the policy response. The best policy response was to ask them to go through stress tests and raise a boatload of capital. And TARP allowed them to do that because they were backstopped by the federal bailout fund, which, by the way, has generated revenue for taxpayers. So the banking system in aggregate is well capitalized and rock solid and can lend, and is lending. If you look at credit growth, it is growing. Households have some more work to do, but just a statistic to give you a sense of how much work they've done, household debt has fallen by $1.2 trillion since the peak. The peak was precisely 3 years ago, August of 2008. That's a 10% reduction. So the debt service burden, the proportion of income that's going to servicing debt by households, is nearly a record low and falling rapidly. And you can see it in the credit statistics. If you look at delinquency rates on credit cards, auto loans, consumer finance loans, pretty much across the board, except for first mortgage, where we've still got problems, and we can talk about that. It's back to pre-recession levels. So I do not believe the U.S. economy is in store for 10 years of going nowhere. We're not. So I do think we need to get through the next 12 to 18 months. And on the other side of that, I think our prospects are bright. But if we go back into recession now, then all these things that the problems with the balance sheet that Rogoff and Reiner are worried about, that Kevin is worried about, we'll just be swamped by them. So we should provide this additional support to the economy in the near term.
All right. Dr. Stone, what have you heard here that you most strongly agree with and most strongly disagree with?
Well, what I've heard that I most strongly agree with right now is from Dr. Zandy first, is that we do need support for the economy right now. To fill in some of that gap between what we're producing and what we're capable of producing. And with respect to the payback part of the argument, what payback means is that you don't permanently boost the recovery path above what it would be, but you fill in some of the gap right now when you really need it. And a couple of years from now, when the fiscal impulse is starting to phase out, the economy is at a higher level of GDP. CBO estimates that we will lose about $2.5 trillion of output that we don't produce, jobs we don't have, income that's not generated before we get back to full employment. The support that we provide now can offset some of that loss. The loss from an output gap is lost forever, and the human hardship that goes with it is there forever. I don't disagree at all with the notion of corporate tax reform and things like that as part of a longer-term strategy to deal with our long-term growth prospects. I'm not sure that they're going to be very helpful in the short run of supporting the economy. And finally, I've just on the question of what the International Monetary Fund says about this fiscal austerity. They just produced a report, a summary of their findings. Their conclusion, I mean, Kevin is right that the research shows that spending-based deficit reduction across a wide variety of situations in different countries at different times does tend to produce smaller losses to the economy than tax-based deficit reduction in those countries. But under current U.S. economic conditions and under the conditions in Europe right now, the IMF doesn't find that to be true. What they say in their latest report is evidence from data over the past 30 years shows that consolidation lowers income in the short term, with wage earners taking more of a hit than others. It also raises unemployment, particularly long-term unemployment. And it doesn't distinguish between tax-based and spending-based.
Okay. I thank you for that. My time's expired.